not everything was calm from the very morning, because the wedding was supposed to take place today. The girl who was the hero of the occasion, for some reason, began to behave strangely a few hours later. She even accidentally knocked over a hot mug, although she was warned that they had brought boiling water. The lady's name was Rosanna Leilatin, and from that moment on, she kept a big and important secret to herself. The whole point was that this body had accidentally gone to another person, and he couldn't believe it. None of the servants could have imagined that in the mistress's place, there was now a completely different girl. Of course, the heroine had no intention of admitting that she had taken someone else's body before the wedding. So the bewilderment on the maids' faces was a completely natural reaction to the lady's oddities. It took a great deal of effort for Rosanna to pretend that she had not changed in her behavior. But no matter how hard the heroine tried, she was never able to completely convince her assistants. Previously, the lady had no name, but now she was the illegitimate child of the Duke of Leilatin himself. It was this man who decided to exchange his daughter in order to gain profitable connections with the Marquis of Giselia. The maids were well aware of their master's cruel plans, but no one dared to interfere. But Rosanna was no longer the quiet and submissive girl who had given herself up to marriage. So the Duke, at first glance, noticed an incomprehensible confidence and strength in his daughter. Having received a new life, Miss was not going to waste it thoughtlessly on the desires of other people. So the first thing she did was cancel her wedding, which she never even thought of agreeing to. In the past, the heroine was a guardian of the empire, and she was called upon only to win the war. But, as soon as the empire won again, the hero was sent to sleep until the next battle. Such a futile existence only for the sake of the emperor could not help but upset the great warrior. More than anything in the world, the girl wanted to stop this crazy cycle of calls. She was hurt by the fact that personal freedom and desires had never existed in her life. Being a hero, the lady was forced to blindly follow all the orders of the current ruler. And then suddenly, the girl opened her eyes. But her own body did not belong to her before. There was no hint of blood or screams of terror around, only the silence and tranquility of the estate. Only the reflection in the mirror could tell the heroine that, for some reason, she had ended up in another body. The heroine remembered that this girl had a very sad fate due to her illegitimate birth. No matter how much Rosanna tried to be friends with her father, it was all absolutely useless. Wanting to prove to her father that she was capable of great things, Leilatin chose a political marriage for herself. But even this decision could not save the lady from death, as she jumped off the cliff out of despair. And now this stupid duke stood before the new Rosanna, not suspecting that he could kill her. But the current girl did not need her father's love, because she only wanted to be free. For the first time in her life, the heroine said something that a real Lady Leilatin would never have dared to do. And now, Rosanne was about to break off her wedding with the groom she actually hated. The Duke's reaction was predictable, as he began to swing his arms in indignation. And this time, for the first time, the girl felt severe pain even from a slight touch. The heroine did not expect that her new body would be unable to withstand any damage. For fun, she decided to test the Duke's resilience to understand the patience of the people. The lady's strength was so great that after just a moment, the man winced in pain. This is how Rosanne made it clear that she was no longer going to be a puppet in other hands. Leilatin had never encountered resistance from his daughter before, so he couldn't respond. From his face, the heroine guessed that her father would not dare to disturb her in the near future. It has been about 10 years since the great warrior was last sealed, and the girl had no idea what had gone wrong, since she found herself in the body of an illegitimate aristocrat. But even so, Rosanna was delighted by the bright colors of this world, which she had not seen before. Now, Miss finally received the long-awaited freedom and could calmly enjoy everything. This realization almost brought tears to Leilatin's eyes, even though she couldn't afford to ruin her makeup. Meanwhile, in the main hall, no one suspected that this wedding would not actually take place. The aristocrats cheerfully discussed the future newlyweds, feeling sympathy only for the Marquise. Each of them wanted to get as close as possible to the Giselian family, which was known for its wealth. Suddenly, people heard about the unexpected appearance of some person, which was forbidden. It turned out that Rosanna had hurried into the hall, intending to ruin her own wedding. But the heroine was involuntarily distracted by the beauty of this place, which she had never seen before. On the faces of some aristocrats, one could read slight bewilderment mixed with friendliness. But this did not bother the lady at all, who was used to not paying attention to others. Layla Ten was genuinely glad that she had managed to meet all these people in one place. She saw that many could not hide their smiles, trying not to pay attention to her. While the aristocrats did not understand what was going on, the girl felt confident. The noble ladies even considered themselves insulted, since they had no intention of forgetting the wedding. Only now Rosanna announced that there will actually be no wedding. As the girl expected, her words caused great bewilderment among the aristocrats, who had expected a different outcome. The people who were most indignant were those who could have benefited greatly from this union. But no one could convince Rosanna that she had no intention of wasting her life on unnecessary things. No matter how much people around her were arguing, unhappy with this decision, the lady didn't even pay attention to them. Roseanne was the only one canceling her wedding that day, and so she felt she had every right to do so. The aristocrats had not yet realized that they could no longer influence this lady in any way, all because the great warrior knew better than anyone what a coward Duke Leilatin was. So she did not listen to anyone in this room, because the emperor had no power over her. Rosanna couldn't help but notice that some of the strength from her previous body still remained with her. For example, the girl could sense the presence of people several meters away, and she was strong, so she almost immediately noticed that the failed groom was approaching her down the corridor. The boy turned out to be even uglier in appearance than in the memories of the Duke of Leilatin's daughter. The heroine had no intention of feeling sorry for this man, whom she was seeing for the second time in her life. But Alex couldn't just let go of the girl, a union with whom would bring him a lot. While Rosanna was once again losing her freedom, the Marquise's son was acquiring good connections. For the first time in his life, the guy faced such obvious opposition from such a young lady. He didn't perceive the girl as a worthy rival, so he even allowed himself to shout. Alex was confident that Duke Leilatin would not miss such a good opportunity for unification. The Marquise's son had no idea that the heroine did not feel her father's power over her. Instead, she once again reminded us of the dissolution of the political wedding. There was no hint of fear or respect in Rosanna's eyes for the man standing in front of her. All this only angered the Marquise's son even more, as he was used to everyone complimenting him. And it was only from this strange girl that the guy was never able to achieve a relationship worthy of him. Alex could no longer tolerate this, although he was not allowed to use force. But suddenly, a completely different person, who happened to be passing by, stood up for the Duke's daughter. It was Duke Chaitin Varfos, who was drawing attention to the injustice around him. The boy enjoyed popularity and authority, although he was the illegitimate son of the emperor. But the girl was much more attracted to his beautiful scarlet eyes, which seemed to glow. Next to him, the Marquis immediately began to seem almost ugly, although he had a pleasant appearance. Rosanna was unnerved by the fact that she did not sense the Duke's presence, although she was sensitive to such things. To Leilatin's surprise, Alex began to tremble with excitement and fear. Unable to hide his emotions, few people around Chaitin could remain calm, as his aura was so oppressive. And this time, Varfeus was clearly ill-disposed towards the Marquise's son. Alex didn't expect that such a rich and famous man would actually accept the wedding invitation. The result of his careless behavior was the displeasure of the Duke, who was a dangerous person. After all, the Leilatin house was closely connected to the emperor, so Chaitin was furious. Therefore, Varfeus had no right to ignore such behavior even from an aristocrat. Alex found himself completely humiliated in just a few moments, as if he had no eloquence. But the boy understood perfectly well how dangerous it was to contradict a relative of the emperor himself. Therefore, Gisela did not dare to say another word against Chaitin, but quickly ran away. But instead of gratitude, Varfus heard that he should thank the lady. The guy didn't understand at all the train of thought of the girl whom he had just saved from her annoying fiancé. But the heroine remembered that the Duke was not held in high esteem by the emperor, and this wedding would strengthen him. So it turned out that the dissolution of the relationship between Giselius and Leilatin was only to the advantage of the Varfus family. The heroine's thoughts were fundamentally different from what other ladies might have said in her place. Therefore, it was much more difficult for the Duke to find words that were delicate enough for Miss. The only thing that saved him from the conversation was that his father wanted to see his son, who had recently returned from the war. Chaitin had such good manners that he congratulated Rosanna on breaking off her engagement. The guy saw that the girl was not at all sad about this, because she did not want a wedding. With his behavior, Varfus left a good impression on the lady who hid her identity. She knew that the ruler should have already noticed her disappearance, but she chose a wait-and-see tactic. Meanwhile, the emperor was furious and destroying everything around him because he had lost the great warrior. The man was in deep despair because he could do little without an obedient hero by his side. The ruler would never have let the girl go if he had not accidentally lost her among the people. And now, he didn't even suspect that the heroine had ended up in the body of the Duke of Leylatin's daughter. The girl had to come to terms with the fact that her new body had almost no physical strength. Meanwhile, her feelings were still as heightened as in her past life during the wars. Not everything was so simple in the lady's life, because she had to somehow preserve the freedom she had received. Rosanna knew she had to break the seal so she wouldn't be controlled by anyone anymore. But the heroine knew too little to deal with this problem on her own. Before, the girl had no time to think about who she was before and where this strength came from. Each time, the great warrior was called out of eternal sleep only during some battles, and the lady's only task was victory, without which she could not return from the battlefield. But Miss didn't even know anything about the events of 10 years ago, where there was a fight with a dragon. And only the Duke could shed light on this matter, because he received a lot of information from the ruler. In Rosanna's eyes, this matter did not require delay. Although the man was currently resting in the room, everything was leaning towards the fact that nothing would stop the heroine from achieving her goals in any endeavor. The father suspected that his daughter would one day stop obeying him, so he was not surprised. The lady was immediately interested in the fact that the Duke's right hand was still bandaged due to an injury. She clearly remembered that she had firmly shaken that particular hand that time, which could have been the cause of the pain. Leylatin could afford to devote a little time to his daughter, whom he had not noticed for many years. And Rosanna was going to do everything to find out about the squad sent to fight the dragon. She hoped that with her friends, she would be able to break the seal of the great warrior many times faster. The girl was only glad that she had the opportunity to talk with friends. But the lady didn't expect that all those knights would end up dead during the battle. Only Varfus was able to return from that battle, which earned the admiration of Duke Leylatin. For a long time, the heroine could not believe that all her friends died on the battlefield 10 years ago. She thought their reunion was already a done deal, but things turned out differently. The most terrible thing was that the Duke refused to reveal any details of this matter, so Rosanna was unable to find out what exactly happened to the squad of knights close to her heart. No matter how sad the lady was, this time she had to give up on the search for the truth. Meanwhile, the Duke's reaction suggested to the girl that something was fishy about these deaths. It was at this very moment that the heroine heard about the arrival of an uninvited guest at their estate. Rosanna just wanted to meet Duke Varfus, and he himself came to her house. Before anyone could stop her, the girl ran as fast as she could towards the living room. She understood that if she didn't make it in time, she wouldn't be able to talk to this important person in person. But only Chaitin could tell what happened to the other knights in the battle. That is why the lady did not hesitate, because the opportunity to find out the truth was just a meter away from her. Suddenly, the Duke himself asked if Leylatin had anything to do with the sealing of the Black Dragon. More than anything in the world, the heroine was afraid that this guy of imperial blood could recognize her. Therefore, he could become a problem for the lady that needed to be urgently resolved. But it turned out that the Duke had no suspicions about another soul in Rosanna's body. Instead, he noticed that in her company, the voice in his head became quieter. Only after touching the girl's hand did the dragon's curse stop working on the guy. The heroine had never heard of sealing having such terrible properties before. Now, Chaitin needed Rosanna's support, as she had a healing effect on him. The two had a lot to talk about with each other, because of the nuances of their lives. But the guards were already pounding on the door, so the couple had almost no time to talk. No matter how much the lady would like to stay, she will be driven away immediately after the locked door is opened. But Leylatin had already learned that the Duke genuinely needed any closeness with her. Although the guy didn't know the reasons, he really did feel better when he was around the girl. And from this man, the heroine needed the fulfillment of any of her wishes in the future. This scenario was too dangerous for Chaitin, despite his constant headaches. There were literally a few seconds left before the girl was thrown out of the room. The thought of a kiss came into Rosanna's head, which could help her in this situation. With this, she intended to seal the agreement with Varfus, so that they would help each other in the future. And the guy succumbed to Leilaton's provocations because he needed this union much more. This is how the servants caught the two aristocrats in an intimate moment that no one suspected. Rumors of a kiss between Rosanna and Chaitin quickly spread among many aristocrats. No one could miss the opportunity to talk about such a thing, so the information reached the emperor. All the newspapers were screaming about the possibility of a secret love affair between Leilaton and Varfos. Naturally, the lady's father could not ignore such a noisy rumor that shook the entire empire. Rosanna behaved well in front of the Duke, who decided to teach her how to behave. No matter how hard the man tried, not even a drop of the necessary conscience awakened in the miss. But Leilaton could not leave such an incident unattended, so he came up with a punishment for his daughter. He had no idea that house arrest did not bring any inconvenience to the reborn heroine. During the conversation, the girl noticed that her father still wore a bandage on his arm, but it seemed to her that she was able to cope with the power that she inherited from her previous incarnation. The father did not want to admit the shameful fact that he had injured his hand because of his own daughter, so he told everyone around him that he accidentally injured himself on his wedding day due to stress. The heroine did not contradict the man who desperately tried to preserve his pride and honor. As a result, the Duke quickly returned to the question of what his daughter had been up to with Bartheus. He couldn't accept the fact that the lady had become friends with the man who opposed the crown prince. So, the more the girl defended herself, the more she angered her aggressive father. What Leilaton feared most was that the emperor would disown their family because of these gossips. But this was not part of Roseanne's plans when she entered into an alliance with Chaitin. The girl knew that the ruler would definitely look for her, as he would not let his hero go. So she needed to break the seal before the emperor called her into service. Now the great warrior was hidden in the house that was closest to the ruler. But any strong gossip could destroy this connection, which is what Duke Leilaton was worried about. But all these nuances did not bother Rosanna, who simply wanted freedom for herself. So she wasn't going to stop, no matter how much she got on her father's nerves in the process. The man desperately searched for a way to avoid His Majesty's wrath, and the girl offered him to give her in marriage to Bartheus, which would have angered the emperor even more. It wasn't just the lady who still remembered the agreement that was sealed with a passionate kiss. Chaitin still couldn't get over what happened, because he was cautious around ladies. And now, instead of working with his thoughts, he constantly returned to Rosanna's strange actions. His assistant could not understand the reason for the gentleman's oddities, but tried to support him in his own way. But the boy was not at all burdened by the fact that the emperor ultimately did not come to meet his son. He was much more worried about the kiss that was performed at the request of the duke's daughter. Paul was considered a master in love affairs, since he had a beloved wife for a long time. But even he did not expect that love would ever overtake his stern and cold master. The assistant's face showed that he was eager to tell everyone around him about this news. But Chaitin confessed to Paul about the kiss only because the knight was not one to talk. He changed radically only when it came to his beloved wife and work. And now he was sure that the lady had feelings for the Duke. Otherwise, why would she have wanted a kiss? And the assistant personally was in favor of Varfeus not missing such a wonderful opportunity. The guy was in a bad position as his artifact was gradually being destroyed, and the voice of the sealed dragon grew stronger every day due to the awakening of its power. Only Rosanna, with her mere presence, removed all the negative effects of the curse from the Duke. So Varfeus had no doubt that he needed this strange daughter of the Duke of Leilaton. Meanwhile, the heroine suffered from boredom, as she spent her time aimlessly in the garden. Previously, the girl didn't even have time to properly rest after a battle. And now she spent her days looking at nature and eating delicious food from the estate's best chef. But the heroine had no idea that the maids were still laughing at her. The assistants had fun watching the lady unable to open the jar of jam herself. And before, everything was really like that. But now Rosanna had incredible powers. None of the maids expected that the lady would easily handle the jar in a couple of seconds. But they were hoping for a fun spectacle, which was not destined to take place in the end. Unfortunately for her assistants, the heroine noticed their strange reaction after she opened the jam. The girl often forgot that because of her status, she was not supposed to do anything with her own hands. It will take a long time for the lady to get used to the fact that everyone around her is obliged to take care of her down to the smallest detail. This time, Rosanna came to her senses in time and allowed the maid to open the jar for her. The assistant was confused by the strange behavior of the lady, who did not seem like herself. But the maid was even more surprised because she could not open the jar of jam. For some time, the heroine silently watched the maid's attempts to correct this situation. But the lady did not have much patience, so she demanded that the jam be returned to her. The assistant decided that Rosanna had deliberately closed the lid tighter to make fun of her. She couldn't believe her eyes when the miss opened the lid again with the same ease. And the great warrior, as if nothing had happened, began to enjoy the delicious food. If the real Roseanne were in her place, she would definitely have made a scandal about this. But the heroine didn't even think of being indignant, because she had eaten deliciously, and now she was ready to go for a walk. No matter how much time passed, Miss still happily enjoyed the beautiful garden. But this time, something was different, because a small chick accidentally fell from a huge tree. Only thanks to her reflexes from her previous body, the girl caught the bird in time, but just a little more, and the chick could not have been saved after falling from such a height. It was not difficult for the girl to find the nest to which the fallen chick belonged. She felt she had enough strength to help the baby return to his home. Any lady friend would have asked assistance about this, but the heroine is used to solving everything herself. So she bravely climbed the tree, not thinking about the consequences it would cause. Literally, within a few minutes, Rosanna reached the required height where the nest was located. All this time, the chick was trembling with fear, because he did not understand that he was being returned home. But he instantly perked up as soon as he felt the presence of his bird family. The girl's adventure did not end there, because there was a good view from the tree. The lady was always interested in observing the empire for whose sake she had fought so much. And now, Miss could examine a huge number of buildings that were clearly visible. However, the peace around Miss did not last long, as she was soon discovered by her assistants. Rosanna had no idea how much fuss would arise just from her sitting in the tree. All the maids panicked and started looking for people who could help their mistress get down. Miss always thought that ordinary people could climb trees, regardless of their status. But the reaction of her father and his entourage suggested to the lady that it would be better to refrain from this. When the Duke saw his daughter upstairs, he was truly horrified, because she was in danger. The situation became so tense that the heroine pretended that she couldn't get down from the tree. But in a past life, it would have taken the girl less than a few seconds to make such a descent. But now she was forced to justify herself to her father for such strange behavior. Rosanna could never in her life understand why the Duke was angry with her for such behavior. The maids also got into trouble, as they didn't keep an eye on the young mistress's antics in time. The girls couldn't say anything in their defense without being fired for their mistake. The maids found themselves in a difficult situation, as they had nowhere to go at such a time. Unexpectedly, the heroine, who hated such injustice, stood up for her assistants. The girl saw that the maids were simply repeating her father's attitude, which was to ignore his daughter. The Duke felt ashamed of the lady, whom he had really not paid attention to all this time. So the servants' attitude and their ridicule did not come out of nowhere, as one might think. They saw how the master treated his daughter and repeated his actions exactly. Layla Ten had nothing to say in response to the girl, because he was neglecting his duties. All this time, Rosanna was raised alone, never seeing love from her father. The fact that she was an illegitimate child was firmly ingrained even in the heroine's head. Therefore, the lady did everything to ensure that the poor maids would not be punished for her. The great warrior loved to give a second chance to everyone, even if it was not deserved. The Duke watched in surprise at his daughter, who for the first time in her life seemed like an adult to him. Despite being under house arrest, the lady still managed to sneak out of her room that night. The streets around her seemed dull and merciless to her, despite their festive appearance during the day. The girl tried to hide her identity because she had no right to be in this place, but it did not escape her notice how much rottenness was contained in the empire that seemed beautiful. Since ancient times, all emperors depended on the strength of the hero and called him to every war. But all the rulers ignored the fact that ordinary people were suffering from endless battles. And again, the girl heard cries for help that no one heard in this dark alley. A little girl was attacked by a crowd of bandits who wanted to take her last money for food. The boys didn't pay attention to the baby's tears, because they also needed something to eat. But her earnings turned out to be so small that they could hardly feed even one person. The girl tried with all her might to defend her money, which she needed to feed her father, But the bandits were blind to pity and compassion, preferring to continue taking the last. They were not afraid to demonstrate their strength, since no one could resist them anyway. But this time the heroine was nearby, so she stood up for the little girl. Even Roseanne could see that the bandits were collecting too much money from the poor people. The leader did not take the girl seriously, who seemed fragile and weak in appearance. However, for some reason, he couldn't even move the hand that she grabbed him by. While his comrades encouraged him, the man sank deeper and deeper into the abyss of fear and despair. This was not the first time that the great warrior had encountered the fact that her skills were initially underestimated. But in the end, every such impudent person quickly lost, submitting to a greater force. The gang leader could not accept his stupid defeat, because his assistants were stronger. In his company, there was a man who had never lost a street fight before. But Rosanna didn't even listen to the words of this guy, who seemed annoying to her. As a result, the unlucky bandit lost consciousness even before he hit the ground with his head. The lady made it clear that none of the attackers would be able to defeat her, no matter how hard they tried. That's how, in just a couple of minutes, the heroine brought order to one of the city's most brutal streets. From now on, bandits would never agree to rob people for fear of death. The boys remembered this short lesson well, as they had long life plans. While all the bandits were beaten, Rosanna only slightly strained her wrist. Because of this, none of the opponents even thought of attacking the fragile-looking girl anymore. The great warrior often saved civilians, even though she fought for the emperor. But at such moments, she was glad of her strength, because she could do more than just kill on the battlefield. The heroine saw how important her support was for people, and therefore she tried harder. But, as in her previous life, she was not going to give her name, so as not to start rumors. Instead, the lady asked the girl to grow up to be a kind and sympathetic person, despite her poverty. Rosanna hoped that even one saved citizen could change a lot in the empire. She was delighted by the sincere smiles on the faces of people who usually only cried and were sad. However, Miss could not stay forever with the baby, who would have to save herself. But the seeds of hope were planted deep in the girl's soul, and she was not going to give up anymore. Seeing the confidence that flashed across the little girl's face, Rosanna herself broke into a smile. The next morning, the heroine had a meeting with the Duke, who had heard about her story with the tree. The guy couldn't believe that the noble lady herself had climbed a tall tree for some reason. For the first time in his life, he had met an aristocrat who was so reckless with herself. But the heroine herself was much more interested in how the curse had affected the Duke in recent days. Chayton was ashamed to admit that that kiss had saved him for the entire week. The girl had no idea what a strong influence she had on the guy. Instead, the lady saw that Varfoyos had blushed again and attributed it to his poor health. She could only help Chayton with her touch, so the effect quickly wore off. But, at least in the company of a girl, the guy's ability to think clearly was fully restored. But even this did not help the Duke to think in advance that the lady would not always be nearby. But if something happens to Miss, then Varfoyos will be forced to suffer from pain again. The guy had only recently encountered the curse's intensification, so he hadn't come up with any plan. He was lucky to meet Rosanna, but their acquaintance still only helped temporarily. At that moment, completely different thoughts were spinning in the girl's head, which she decided to voice. The heroine was curious about how the Duke was feeling now, so she asked this question. Chayton's mind immediately flashed to Pole and his certainty that Rosanna was in love with the gentleman. But the guy wasn't mentally prepared for something like this, since he hadn't sorted out his feelings. Like a true gentleman, he tried to do everything to make the girl feel good. But the Duke had no idea that from the very beginning, Layla Ten had been worried about his well-being. The lady didn't even think about love, because she was only concerned about the state of her new acquaintance. Varfoyos himself did not expect that he would be upset by such an independent state of affairs. Rosanna, however, was all for playing the role of a couple so that she could continue to treat the Duke. Varfoyos could no longer bear such confusion in his head, because he turned out to be wrong about the lady. The guy barely managed to hide his embarrassed face, which was probably very red from emotion. So today, he was unable to talk even a little more with the Duke's daughter. Rosanna didn't even have time to say anything to the guy before he ran away as if he had someone. The girl fully admitted this possibility, since Chayton had long since reached the age of marriage. A little later, the lady was sad, only because she had not managed to ask Varfoyos about the most important thing. but she really wanted to know what happened to her friends during the battle with the dragon. But what bothered Miss most was that she still could not feel the Duke's presence. The heroine didn't have a chance to stroll around the garden for long, as a maid came running to her with an urgent message. It turned out that the Duke's daughter had a guest waiting in the reception room, and she immediately thought of Chaitin. This was an excellent opportunity for the lady to finally ask the guy the questions that were bothering her. But it turned out that it was not Varfuus who was sitting in the living room, as he had already left long ago. The last thing the great warrior wanted in the world was to meet the crown prince himself. The guy was narcissistic enough to demand undeserved attention from the lady. Joseph Belloise, both in manners and in appearance, strongly resembled his father on the throne. All her life, the heroine was a prisoner of the seal, which was controlled by the imperial family. Each subsequent ruler kept the great warrior on a short leash, and Joseph was no exception, as he planned to rely on the hero for everything during his reign. The girl was so deep in thought that she did not notice the prince's presence in the reception room. But this man was one of those who could have known that her soul had moved into this body. In that case, Rosanna had no choice but to kill this dangerous guy. Seconds seemed like minutes to the girl, who did not know what she should do. And the prince suddenly declared that he had come to take back what had belonged to him from the very beginning. But the lady had no idea that Joseph was talking about marriage, since he did not reveal it to her. Having heard about this, Rosanna completely lost the point of talking with the future heir. It seemed to her that the reason for their meeting would be precisely because the guy revealed her identity. But Joseph was not strong and smart enough to sense the soul of a hero in the lady. Therefore, like an ordinary man, he dreamed of marrying a worthy girl. The prince's strange train of thought calmed the heroine a little, and she was able to think calmly. Only now did Rosanna realize that she wouldn't have been able to get rid of the guy without others noticing. Joseph was too prominent a person for his disappearance to go unnoticed. As the future heir, the boy often communicated with other people through manipulation. But the heroine remembered him as a very small child, so she didn't take him seriously. So it seemed strange to her that Joseph, who had previously barely written, now spoke to her rudely. Belloise's intentions were written on his face, for he was jealous of the lady's relationship with Duke Varfuus. Even if Rosanne hadn't known the guy before, she would still have been able to guess his feelings. Of course, the heroine had no intention of exchanging Chaitin for this arrogant and impudent heir. As a result, the girl angered the prince so much that he threw the precious mug at her. However, the great warrior had no trouble catching the object right out of the air. It was the first time in his life that Joseph had experienced such a good reaction from another girl. Rosanna herself didn't even notice this gesture, since she was acting entirely on reflexes. Such skills deservedly caused concern in the prince, because he did not know how to react. The lady could not miss such a good opportunity to make fun of the stupid heir, although the miss said with a smile that she would now throw the mug as revenge for the prince's reaction. But the guy clearly felt the incredibly oppressive aura that emanated from every cell of the girl, so Joseph was seriously scared, even though he seemed much stronger than the Duke's daughter. Rosanna was even upset by how gentle and stupid her interlocutor was. She had no intention of causing any harm to the heir, as this would have had consequences. But everything changed as soon as the guy mentioned that he would call on the hero for help. Belloise was completely convinced that the great warrior was just a puppet in the hands of his father. As a result, anger so took hold of the lady's mind that she broke the cup, although she threw it aside. The prince didn't even have time to notice how the mug flew past, as the speed was enormous. This once again made it clear to him that Rosanna possessed some kind of phenomenal abilities. At that moment, the heroine did not think at all that she was contradicting the heir to the throne himself. She was sure that the emperor would not be able to summon her soul in the near future. But the guy couldn't admit that he was scared to death by the sweet and weak girl. After all this would lead to people around doubting the reliability of the heir. No matter how much the prince's hands shook from resentment and disappointment, he understood that the lady was right. It was not Rosanne's plan to completely humiliate Joseph, although she did not like him at all. Thanks to her sense of smell, the lady heard another person approaching them in advance. It turned out to be Duke Leilatin, who had just learned of the arrival of the emperor's heir himself. The man immediately noticed that there was only one cup on the table, which was a breach of etiquette. He couldn't believe that his daughter had asked the maids for tea just for herself. But in fact, the heroine simply managed to break one of the cups that contained tea. Laylaten was horrified that his beloved and expensive set had broken so quickly. He immediately realized that his daughter, who had shown herself to be bad, was definitely involved in this. Rosanna felt no regret at all about having managed to frighten the poor prince. But the Duke was not on the girl's side, as he was afraid of losing the Emperor's support. Although, according to the heroine, it was the Crown Prince who first started acting up. But the Duke no longer felt the same anger towards the prince as he did towards his daughter. Never before had Laylaten been forced to reprimand an adult for whom the throne was intended. So he was afraid that Joseph would get angry because of the stupid girl's unpleasant words. For the first time in a long time, the lady felt truly pathetic about her own father. What angered Miss most was that the Duke was unable to be alone with the boy. He clung to his daughter with all his might, just so he wouldn't have to bear the responsibility of the conversation alone. Rosanna easily read all of her father's tricks, so it was easy for her to resist them. She understood perfectly well that re-educating the Duke would take too much time. The only thing the lady didn't know was why the Emperor didn't tell his son anything about the hero. It turned out that the ruler was trying to hide his weakness from his heir in order to preserve the throne. The great warrior was always just a toy in the hands of successive emperors, and the only thing that kept the girl from killing was the seal that controlled her entire life. But the current body was so weak that Miss could get hurt at any time. The only thing that saved Rosanna was that she now had real allies who were not going to betray her. It was about Duke Varfaus, because he needed the lady even more than she needed him. That is why the heroine was sure that the guy could never betray her. So the girl was going to make good use of such a person on her side. But due to her father's punishment, the lady could not visit Chaitin on her own in the near future. So she couldn't think of anything better to do than send her maid to the Varfus estate. The Miss's only mistake was that the assistant was not mentally prepared for such a trip. This girl clearly didn't think she would have to complete such a difficult task. In Rosanna's eyes, the maid could have done more in gratitude for saving her from being fired. But the assistant acted as if such a task was completely impossible for her. The lady didn't even think of despairing so quickly, because she had a plan in case this girl didn't agree to help. She treated all the servants with sympathy, because for them, Duke Laylaten was now a great authority. Therefore, the Miss rewarded the maid with an expensive decoration. Although she did not agree to go to the Varfus estate, Rosanna still didn't see any need for these items, which she didn't really wear. While the maid stubbornly could not understand what she should do with all these expensive items, the heroine was sure that her assistant would not be able to refuse such a precious gift. Even the Duke never spoiled his servants with such expensive and beautiful things as payment. And indeed, just a second later, the maid agreed to go to the Varfus estate. The lady was amazed at the speed with which her assistant took her side, mentally rejecting the Duke. This girl's name was River, and from now on, she was faithful to her generous and kind mistress. So Rosanna could do whatever she wanted in the presence of the maid without fear of gossip. As a small revenge, the lady asked to buy new jewelry and write off the entire amount to the Duke. It seemed to her that even this would not be enough after what her stupid father had made her go through. And River was ready to fulfill any request of the Miss, no matter how incredible it seemed. Rosanna didn't feel at all sorry for her father, who would now have to spend a lot of money. She just looked at the jewelry with surprise and saw that some of it was truly expensive. A little later, the heroine again encountered rumors that the maids were freely spreading. The assistants did not hesitate to speak near the mistress, since they had almost no respect for her. But the lady herself enjoyed playing the game, according to the rules of which she found figures in the clouds. The girl was so engrossed in her work that she didn't pay attention to anyone around her. But then the peace and quiet was cut by the loud cry of the Duke, who was outraged to the depths of his soul. It was the first time in his life that Laylaten had seen such a long shopping list from his illegitimate daughter. However, Rosanna kept a straight face, as she had anticipated this reaction. The man did not want to deal with such expenses, although they had already fallen on his head. He was used to the fact that the girl did not ask him for anything, so he felt hurt. The heroine had already decided to use family connections to solve this problem, so she reminded her dysfunctional father that he was, after all, still her parent. Thus, the girl easily shifted all responsibility for what happened onto the Duke. The lady hoped that Laylaten would understand the meaning of the words spoken to him and change his behavior a little. But this man was so stubborn that he simply refused to pay the entire check. This situation turned out to be disadvantageous for Rosanna, who had no financial savings at all. But Leilaton had already found a way to teach his daughter a lesson, so he wasn't going to stop at words. As soon as the lady received permission to sell her jewelry, her face changed. The girl knew in advance that her father could reduce everything to such stupidity, so she did not despair. Only the Mrs. Maid, who knew the price of the jewelry, began to worry about this. But River did not have enough authority to dissuade the lady from selling the jewelry. No matter how hard the Duke tried, not a drop of regret crossed his daughter's face. The Duke even asked Miss to watch her speech better, since she communicated freely. But in her past life, Rosanna wasn't used to thinking before speaking. So this time too, it was hard for the girl to get used to the fact that she had a different status. For some reason, the lady thought that no one could punish her for her lack of manners. The prince showed himself to be extremely stupid at their meeting, so he is unlikely to return for revenge. Only now did Rosanna see that her father had at least given her words some thought. The heroine still had a long way to go before the Duke would start thinking like a good man. But the man didn't expect that his daughter would decide to sell gifts from the ruler of the empire himself. This circumstance caused another outburst of anger in the Duke. Although he had almost calmed down, the man knew very well how harsh the ruler could be in his decisions. But the heroine believed that with her strength and skills, no one would be able to resist her. Rosanna forgot only that she alone knew about her incredible reincarnation into this body. So the reaction of the Duke, who extended his daughter's house arrest, was quite logical. Even in this state, the lady did not despair, because there was so much beautiful and interesting around. She could spend hours in the garden, which was constantly tended by the estate's gardeners. Only River found the behavior of the lady, who seemed to have forgotten about boredom, strange. The assistant wanted great entertainment for Rosanna, forgetting that Miss was arranging everything. The heroine could spend the whole day observing nature, which gave her pleasure. Everything around was so different from what the girl remembered during her long battles. Her soul was always sharpened only for battles, and the lady was not allowed to do anything else. Every time the ruler changed for everyone, nothing changed in the life of the great warrior. That is why the heroine tried so hard to make up for all the lost years of her life with her walks. So all the maid's offers were quickly rejected, because the lady wanted to go for a walk. However, the girl became interested in the opportunity to get into the estate's huge library. This alone made River so happy, as if she had received a large inheritance for free. But the Duke's daughter was not destined to continue enjoying the pleasant walk. One of the servants hastily reported that an important guest from the nobility had unexpectedly arrived to see the girl. It turned out that Lady Brina Potlengi had expressed a desire to speak with Rosanna personally. But even the guest's high status didn't make the heroine run to her right now with all her might. The Duke's daughter was in no hurry to hurry, as she still wanted to finish her walk. Although the assistant believed that such guests should be greeted immediately, he did not dare say anything to the lady. So the lady could only guess why the daughter of the Potlengi house decided to visit her. Leilaton was certain that no one in her family had ever interacted with Lady Brina before, and Miss did not share River's assumption, who was hoping for friendship between the ladies. The maid announced that Brina often became the bearer of the title of the Heavenly Galaxy, and with this, she made the lady remember how exactly this strange title came into being. Several decades ago, the Emperor summoned the heroine to come up with a gift for the ladies. The girl didn't care about these nuances, but she couldn't refuse the ruler his wishes. In the end, the lady offered this title, if only His Majesty would leave her alone as soon as possible. But Miss couldn't have imagined that after so many years, her joke would become so established in society. The ruler liked this idea so much that he, without a second thought, passed it off as his own. Therefore, all attempts to win this strange title seemed stupid to Rosanna. It turns out that to receive such a title, you don't need to be the smartest lady at all. Over time, this title began to be awarded only to the most beautiful girls. The heroine could not have imagined that everything would turn out this way, but she did not want to participate. The last thing the Duke's daughter was interested in was fighting for the title from the Emperor. Rosanna gave Potlenga enough time to get bored in the estate's living room. It was immediately obvious from the guest that she had not come at all for the sake of friendship with the daughter of the Duke of Leilaton. Even her facial expression showed how hostile Brina was. Upon seeing her, the heroine realized that she had already heard something about this girl's family. Meanwhile, Potlengi expressed her dissatisfaction with the long wait for the meeting. The lady was not accustomed to being treated as anything other than one of the most noble aristocrats. But Rosanna didn't care about all the titles and statuses that the other ladies revered. The Duke's daughter wanted to finish this conversation as quickly as possible, because she had not looked around the entire garden. The knight of the Potlengi family could not tolerate such a cold-blooded attitude towards his mistress. But Brina didn't let Marilu deal with the impudent Rosanna, because now was not the time. In the past, Leilatian was much more cautious, but now it's as if she's gone a little crazy. Therefore, Potlengi communicated delicately with the girl, who did not inspire confidence in her. It got to the point that the heroine rudely interrupted her guest, because she remembered her family. Rosanna cheerfully stated that it was this family that bought their title to become aristocrats. This blow was below the belt for Brina, who carefully hid her ancestry from everyone. She couldn't even imagine where her peer had learned such an unpleasant fact. This time, Merrill reacted faster than his mistress, throwing a gauntlet in the direction of the Duke's daughter. Rosanne didn't know that this gesture meant accepting a duel if you raised the glove. So the girl found herself in an unusual situation for herself, because she accidentally accepted the challenge. The heroine caught the glove purely on reflexes, but found herself drawn into such a complex matter. Although Brina reprimanded the active knight, it was too late to cancel the duel. Potlengi openly laughed at Rosanna, who had so carelessly accepted the fight with the knight. The girl was sure that Leilatian would not be able to find a worthy protector. Only the maid understood the full danger of this duel with the knight from the Potlengi family. Merrill was known as a strong competitor, as he almost joined the imperial squad. The difficulty was also that Rosanna could not compete in this fight herself. Although the heroine would certainly have won, she needed to find a protector for herself. However, the knights of the Leilatian house did not inspire the lady with any confidence in their skills. These guys seemed like ordinary people who could barely hold a sword in their hands. They didn't even greet Rosanna. Although River introduced the lady in a timely manner, the heroine immediately realized that these guys only recognized strength, and she seemed weak to them. Therefore, none of the knights looked in the girl's direction, no matter what her status was. But Rosanne was no longer the quiet lady she once was, so she was going to clean up the mess. Now she remembered very well how she had previously communicated with such people in the role of a great warrior. The maid quickly became horrified by the mistress's rude words, because a lady could not speak like that. But the knights did not blink an eye, as they often heard the Duke scold them for their laziness. They completely forgot that the girl had the opportunity to fire everyone from the Leilatian estate. The knights became wary only when the lady seriously announced their removal from office. Rosanne manipulated the boys to the fullest extent, playing on their weaknesses that they were unaware of. And this time, the knights could not look down on the lady who had captivated them with her words. And the miss was already demanding with all her might that the butler and the captain of the knights come to her so that she could fire everyone. Rosanna no longer feared anyone except the emperor, who could seal her away again for battle. So the knights were foolish when they thought that the lady could not resist them. All their hope was on the commander named Andrew Segway, who knew how to charm people. The boy looked so handsome and harmless that the Duke often forgave him for his mistakes. But the heroine was not one of those who would agree to take all the blame for what happened upon herself. But Andrew was confident that he could win over the young girl with his appearance alone. Rosanna just smiled in response, informing everyone that they needed to fight Merrill. Each of the knights knew very well how bloodthirsty and strong this man was. So among the guys, there was not a single one willing to stand up for the honor of the Duke's daughter. The heroine immediately suspected that all the knights' courage would fade after the words about the duel. Even Segway was not ready to fight Merrill, who was widely known in their circles. Even the most foolish person would have realized that the boys were very scared at this prospect. Rosanne had no intention of pitying the cowards who were unable to stand up for her. But all the knights supported the commander, who lied that they would have fought with someone else. Therefore, the lady did not mince her words when she reported the weakness of the knights before her. The girl had fought a lot shoulder to shoulder with real warriors, so she knew how to identify them. And the assistants of the Leilatian estate looked nothing like lost kittens. Andrew was not one to tolerate such open humiliation directed at him. So Segway got really angry, even though he was only shaking in fear of the other guy. But the commander had enough strength to deal with the girl, no matter how stupid it might look. So the guy was going to punish the impudent girl, even though she was the Duke's daughter. It seemed to Andrew that as soon as he drew his sword, the lady would immediately change her mind. But something went wrong at the very beginning of this decision, because the commander could not move from his place. The heroine pressed lightly on the hilt of the sword, but this was enough for Segway to lose to her. The knights had no doubt in the commander's victory, wanting to teach the lady a lesson too. Andrew saw that Miss held his sword with only one hand, but he could not draw the weapon. The realization that he was not strong enough fell like a heavy burden on the commander of the knights. For a few minutes, Rosanna was able to completely suppress the guy's will to fight. The girl's face did not change at all, but the knight felt incredible fear. Andrew was smart enough to stop his futile attempts to win over this lady. Instead, he bowed his head to the Duke's daughter, who was many times stronger than him. The heroine was satisfied with such submission because she did not intend to achieve anything more. But the other knights still had no idea why the commander had made such a decision. The boys were confident that their skills would be sufficient to enlist in another service, so they didn't understand why they had to bow down to a fragile and self-satisfied girl. However, just a moment later, everyone who had previously laughed at Miss knelt before her. Rosanna had no doubt that she would be able to achieve fair treatment. Her mission was accomplished at this point, as Andrew was already scared to death by the lady's power. Although the heroine brought order to the Duke's army, she was still unable to find a protector for herself. But the great warrior didn't expect that River would accidentally see all her actions. The maid stubbornly pretended that nothing unusual had just happened before her eyes. This made it clear to the Duke's daughter that this girl could be trusted if she was well bribed. For such occasions, Rosanna always had small pieces of jewelry with her to ask for silence. As soon as the assistant saw an expensive thing, she immediately agreed to do any job. It was easiest for the heroine to have conversations with such a person, since there was a lot to hide. Even if River had her own opinion, she obediently obeyed the rich lady in everything. As soon as Rosanna left the squad of knights, some of them left of their own free will. Andrew did not restrain any of the proud cowards who did not want to submit to the young lady. But although the lady had given the guy the desire to train, now none of them were suitable for her. River thought that for such an important matter, they could easily hire some mercenary, but the heroine knew better than anyone that she shouldn't have given her money to these scoundrels. So the maid accidentally became a witness to how angry her mistress could be. From her past life, the heroine remembered all too well how often mercenaries deceived her. So River had no choice but to admire the lady's clever thoughts. Of the two of them, only the maid took the duel situation seriously. The assistant could not allow the lady to tarnish her honor, although Rosanna did not understand anything. Vast experience in battles told the heroine that sometimes it was possible to escape from the battlefield. River couldn't help but feel sad, knowing how much was at stake in this fight. This information immediately interested Rosanna, who needed money. She immediately wanted to personally participate in the betting, although no one believed in her victory. This only made the maid even more frightened, because her mistress still had not found a knight for herself. But the Duke's daughter was already ready to put everything she had on the line. So River had to show the lady the way to the place where all the aristocrats were placing their bets. Potlengi was supported most of all by the Marquis's son, Giselius, who wanted revenge on Layla Ten. He personally placed a large bet on Brina's victory, expecting her to win. Like all the other aristocrats, Alex didn't even consider the options for Rosanna's victory. At that moment, Potlengi attracted all eyes, which only made the girl happy. Therefore, she boldly raised her own stakes, causing approval and admiration among those around her. Brina had faith in Meryl and knew that none of the knights of House Leylathan would oppose her. This continued until the aristocrats heard an incomprehensible noise from the side. It turned out that Rosanna had to fight her way into the room to place her bet. But the girl acted as if she hadn't just almost fought with the guards. The heroine was confident in herself and her victory, contrary to the opinion of everyone else. When he saw his ex-fiancée, Alex was the first to shout that he didn't want to see the girl here. But this attitude did not at all embarrass the warrior, who often frightened other people. The Marquis's son was the first to throw the impudent Rosanna out the door, not wanting to involve her in conversations. But the lady managed to declare that she was going to bet a large sum on her victory in the duel. She sincerely did not understand why everyone around her reacted so strangely to her simple desire. Rosanna believed in her victory, so she wanted to use betting as a source of income. Alex yelled at the lady the most, because he was still angry about the breakup of their wedding. On his side was Potlengi, who felt the same hatred for the arrogant Leylatan. But even Brina was surprised that Rosanna planned to defeat Meryl. The aristocrat made an incautious remark towards the heroine, which did not go unnoticed. The great warrior's gaze darkened sharply, bringing terror to all her opponents in the hall. Potlenga had the good sense to keep quiet at that moment, to avoid getting into more trouble. The entire hall instantly fell silent, sensing the oppressive atmosphere emanating from the Duke of Leylatan's daughter. Brina suffered because she still perceived Rosanna as a good-natured person. But now, Lady Potlengi saw how much the Duke's daughter had changed in such a short time. Evil tongues could not remain silent this time either, although Rosanna terrified with just her gaze. But all her life, Leylatan had been as quiet as a mouse, and then suddenly her behavior changed dramatically. Her mere presence was noticeable from afar, although the girl herself did nothing in particular. Now people couldn't take their eyes off the lady who was acting so confidently, so no one dared to argue with the Duke's daughter, no matter how much they wanted to drive her away. Instead, the heroine finally made it to the table where bets on the battle were being taken. She quickly signed the document, placing a high stake on her victory. After this, the lady disappeared from the hall, as if she had never been there. But people remembered everything. The aristocrats began to discuss Rosanna, and only Varfeos continued to keep aloof. A few days later, the heroine behaved as calmly as she had every day up to that point. But River was unable to contain her excitement, because the duel was supposed to take place tomorrow. But the lady didn't even want to hear about hiring mercenaries for this difficult battle. The heroine was full of righteous anger every time the maid suggested this option. Of course, the assistant wanted the lady to win, but without the knight, nothing good would happen. That's why she felt so deeply every time Rosanne turned down guys. Since the announcement of the duel, many candidates have come to the Duke's daughter, but she did not approve of them. The great warrior could not allow someone weak to defend her honor in front of people. That's why she didn't listen at all to the cries of her father, who was trying to intervene in this duel. River heard that the Duke ended up taking it out on the knights who tried to leave him. Only now did Rosanna notice that the maid was too indifferent to her duel. But the assistant didn't have to support the young lady so much. In fact, the girl was counting on the fact that if she won, she would also receive something expensive. The heroine was good at recognizing lies, so she realized that her assistant was telling her the truth. The lady liked the fact that River didn't try to hide her true intentions from her, so Miss was once again convinced that she had found the right person for herself in the estate. The maid, in anticipation of a reward, did more and more useful things for her young mistress. It was only thanks to her that the heroine learned that everyone in the estate knew about the absence of her knight. But Rosanna was interested in the fact that, for some reason, other aristocrats also knew about her affairs. This was the only question River had no answer to, since she couldn't suspect anyone she knew. In fact, the great warrior had no intention of remaining idle, as she wanted to win the duel. That is why she invited Duke Barthius, whose arrival was announced by the servants. The girl had no doubt that this guy would be able to win money for her tomorrow. All that remained was to persuade Chaitin to take part in the battle to defend Leylatan's honor. But from the very beginning, the acquaintance looked somehow wary and tense from head to toe. However, Rosanna was not good at identifying what exactly was bothering people, so she threw the idea out. The lady was only interested in why the Duke had not visited her earlier, although he had the opportunity. Miss sincerely tried to get closer to this man who was on her side, and the girl's words sank into the soul of the guy, who gradually began to fall in love with her. Chaitin could not react calmly to such words that brought them closer to each other. That's why Varfus himself blushed noticeably, even though the heroine didn't mean anything romantic. This reaction from her friend seemed strange to Rosanna, who rarely interacted with people. Only by quickly changing the subject was Chaitin able to avoid an awkward situation. He quickly learned that the lady had recently been visited by a member of his imperial family, and now the guy felt guilty for attracting Joseph's attention to the girl. It was immediately clear that the Leylatan family was under constant surveillance by the emperor. So, by his presence on this family's estate, the Duke put all the aristocrats at risk. But Rosanna wasn't interested in such nuances, because she knew that the guy had bet on her in the duel. Apart from Varfeus, no one else would have dared to name such a large sum in battle. Besides, only Chaitin could believe in his ally's victory, no matter how incredible it seemed. So the heroine quickly figured out the person who bet on her, despite the general condemnation. But the Duke specifically paid the servants to ensure their silence about this matter. But nothing came of it, because the lady quickly received all the necessary information about her friend. So now Miss was wondering why the guy visited her after so much time. Only at that moment did the Duke realize that he would not be able to hide anything from this intelligent lady. Therefore, he honestly admitted that he would like to offer his help to the Miss for the duel. But Varfus meant that he would send one of his knights to protect the girl. This arrangement did not suit the heroine, which she immediately demonstrated with her abrupt and active actions. This was not at all what the great warrior of the Empire had originally expected. She wanted Chaitin to personally fight for her in the duel, because he could win. But the guy was held back by the fact that only famous knights could participate in the battle. Although he was one of those whom the ruler constantly sent to the battlefield for the sake of victory. So Rosanna was not wrong when she considered Chaitin to be the best knight in the Empire. The guy was only restrained by moral norms and rules, which he always honestly observed. Even in her previous body, the lady had the opportunity to observe how important these nuances were for the Duke. She supervised little Chaitin, who was already sent to war at that age. Therefore, the lady knew her ally better than anyone and believed that she could trust him. Rosanna was not going to accept the Duke's refusal, because only he could defeat Meryl. All this time, the girl helped Varfeus fight the terrible curse with all her might. So the guy was attached to this lady much deeper than he himself could suspect. There was no reason for Chaitin to refuse Rosanna after everything she had done for him. The heroine knew in advance that the guy would fall for her words, which is why she chose him. The girl needed all the interest on the invested money that victory could bring. She was not at all afraid of the crown prince, since she herself was the hero he could summon. But Varfus knew how dangerous his relatives could be if angered. Rosanne was still angry at Joseph for daring to throw a cup at her. As soon as the Duke heard about this incident, his face immediately changed. The boy seemed genuinely concerned about what had happened to the Duke's daughter not long ago. The great warrior didn't know how much the aristocrats worried about even a small scratch. And now she felt all the care from the Duke, who was trying to help her. The lady felt awkward for a moment, because no one had ever worried about her injuries before. But she quickly changed the subject, saying that the prince had threatened to summon a hero to the estate. Chaitin knew better than anyone how strong the Empire's great warrior was. However, the guy had no doubt that the woman would not hurt the innocent in vain. As a child, Varfeus was able to personally verify how honest and fair the warrior was. Never before had the heroine heard good words about herself, who killed many people in the war. But deep down, the girl always wanted to prove that she was actually a good person. And by chance, the Duke gave the lady this hope, because he madly believed in the hero's actions. No matter how hard the guy tried to develop, he could never get close to that woman's strength. But now, the lady surprised him by saying that it was not the time to talk about the hero, because they had to portray love. At the very beginning of their union, the guy and the girl agreed to pretend to be lovers. And still, Chaitin could hardly restrain himself from taking the lady's hand to make himself feel better. Therefore, when Miss herself went to the meeting, the guy had no choice but to resign himself. Only Rosanna could bring the Duke the peace he longed for, and she understood it. So Varfeus had to agree to duel to maintain this relationship. After all, the curse was becoming stronger and stronger. But in the company of the girl, the guy did not feel its effects. The next day was the time for the duel, which many aristocrats gathered to watch. Brina personally was delighted by the number of people who gathered for such a fascinating spectacle. The girl did everything to ensure her victory, as she invited Alex Gazelia to host the duel. But Rosanna didn't pay any attention to such an obvious setup from her cunning rival. The girl did not suspect anything, because she had no doubt in her victory in the duel. Potlengi quickly decided that the daughter of Duke Leilatin had never found a knight for herself, which was a real shame. But she didn't expect that Rosanna would have a protector, especially one so famous in the Empire. Chaitin appeared unexpectedly for everyone, since he was famous for trying to avoid such events. So the atmosphere in society changed dramatically after the guy arrived, although no one tried to show it. Only Brina dared to ask why the Duke had come to such a modest duel. Potlengi didn't expect that Varfeus would not only be on Rosanna's side, but would also defend her today. The lady refused to believe that Chaitin had voluntarily decided to interfere in the affairs of the Duke of Leilatin's daughter. But Varfus's face made it clear that he would not tolerate any suspicions towards him from the outside. So all Brina could do was shut her mouth and silently accept the fact that Rosanna had found a powerful ally. Fear of possible defeat and subsequent rumors filled Potlenga's entire consciousness. She couldn't just accept such strong rivals for the Duke's daughter. The girl appealed to everyone to seek justice and remove Chaitin from the fight. However, in this case, Roseanne had logical arguments in defense of the guy. No one could deny that Varfeus, as a knight, had participated in battles, which was what the lady was pressing for. So Brina couldn't achieve anything with her little performance in front of everyone. Whatever Potlengi says now, Chaitin will take part in the duel on Rosanna's side. So the start of the competition was soon announced, and the Duke was not at all worried about it. Unlike him, Meryl was worried about the possibility of losing, because he was not as strong. But it was not in the knight's nature to retreat from a fight that he himself had declared not long ago. Seeing the doubt on the boy's face, the Duke allowed him to attack first to give him an advantage. Meryl had no idea that even such an indulgence would not be enough for him to win. It was no trouble at all for Chaitin to dodge the weaker boy's first attack. So, a moment later, the Duke swung his sword towards his opponent for the decisive blow. Chaitin's face did not express an ounce of sympathy towards his naive opponent. Meryl realized his defeat a moment before it happened, and didn't have time to react. And so, in a matter of seconds, Varfeus easily defeated the knight who was trying to become an imperial knight. The poor guy was defeated so quickly that he barely had time to defend himself against the Duke. Chaitin did not become arrogant about the victory, since for him it was expected anyway. He was pleased that he was able to bring Rosanna some much-needed financial help. Brina was the most dissatisfied with what happened, although it was already too late. But the heroine behaved relaxed, because everything happened exactly as she wanted. The girl had no idea that all this time she had such an easy way to make money. While Potlengi was burning with shame and disgrace, Rosanna smiled cheerfully at everyone around her. And this joyful smile only caused even more hatred inside the defeated Brina. As a result, for the first time in her life, the daughter of Duke Lilatin earned so much money in one day. Therefore, Miss did not care that the aristocrats began to gossip about her relationship with the Duke. Only River was worried about this, which she honestly admitted to her beloved mistress. But the girl did not expect that. Instead of answering, Rosanna would suddenly ask her for something. The maid had recently received a bonus, so she thought the lady was asking for it back. But the heroine only needed the key to the library, which her assistant got for her. The great warrior was never so petty as to deprive anyone of gifts. Raven was overjoyed that her expectations were not met, and the money remained with her. From now on, the assistant was going to do her job for the mistress even better. But in reality, Rosanna's plan was much more insidious than the maid could have imagined. This is all because the girl did not intend to wait until the next morning, but took advantage of the onset of night. The lady didn't need anyone to know exactly what books she was going to read. And if you take books during the day, you need to write down each one separately in the library journal. That's why the heroine went to the library at night, as soon as she received the key from it. She was looking for any information about the expedition against the dragon that the emperor had organized. The books contained a lot of information about how the ruler tried for the well-being of his people. It was only for this reason that he waged endless wars, although it was precisely these that depleted the city's supplies. But in all these books, there was no information about the campaign against the Black Dragon. It turned out that the girl and her comrades were simply erased from history by decree of the emperor. But the lady had to be distracted, as she noticed the presence of some stranger. Miss reacted instantly and caught the man who was secretly watching her. The stranger didn't have time to say a word before the heroine threw him onto the cold floor. She knew perfectly well how torture should be carried out, and she had no intention of forgiving the spy. Rosanna's eyes burned with a burning coldness, as the lady was more serious than ever. The girl knew all the servants in the estate, but she could not recognize this guy by his voice and appearance. Because of the darkness, the heroine could not really see the face of the man she had pinned to the floor, and the nearest lamp was too far away for her to count on light. At the moment when the girl slightly loosened her grip, the traitor managed to escape from her hands. The speed with which he ran away would have made even the fastest runner envious. Miss had no intention of pursuing the spy, as she would have been able to find him in the morning anyway. The heroine would never have left the traitor unpunished, but this matter could wait a little. The next morning, The girl behaved as usual, so she was able to avoid any suspicion. The maid had prepared a trip to the library for her mistress in advance and invited the librarian. When she saw him, Rosanna was immediately surprised, as the guy looked a little strange. His name was Henry Austen, and for some reason, he was wrapped in a scarf despite the warm weather. The guy also looked a little rumpled, as if it was his neck that the miss had been squeezing that night. He announced, somewhat awkwardly, that he would like to personally escort the Duke's daughter to the bookshelves. The maid was delighted with the librarian's help, but the miss did not share her joy, knowing about that night. But Rosanna couldn't tell anyone about her suspicions, because then she would have exposed herself. The girl only had to remove Austen's scarf to be absolutely sure that he was a traitor. Before the lady could say a word, Raven left her completely in the care of this stranger. The Duke's daughter did not understand why her assistant had so quickly trusted Henry, who was almost invisible. Just in case, she sent the maid away on business so that the girl would not suffer because of Austen's actions. The guy behaved calmly, although it was clear that he was clearly hot in this suspicious scarf. However, Henry showed no desire to take it off because he did not want to show his neck underneath. For a moment, Rosanna wondered if it was an innocent person she had been strangling that night. But nothing could be said for sure, because the lady did not yet sense whether the librarian was a spy. So it was necessary to first look under the scarf, and only then draw any conclusions. Suddenly, Henry himself became more serious and hinted that someone had attacked him that night. So it became clear to the lady that this was the guy she was dealing with, but he ran away. Austen couldn't lie anyway, so he didn't hide his night meeting for long. But in reality, the librarian had served the Leylatin family faithfully for many years. All his predecessors had carried out a more difficult task, and the guy was in poor health. While the guy was speaking, the miss noticed that he took exactly the same books that she took. This once again awakened in the girl the desire to take the scarf off the librarian in order to find out everything. However, any attempt by Miss to do this would inevitably arouse Henry's suspicion. But Roseanne really needed that scarf to see the supposed bruises on the guy's neck. Only now did Austen realize that it was the Duke of Leylatin's daughter who had attacked him that night. But the heroine easily dodged the librarian's attack, which tried to harm her. She was still able to reach the scarf and unwound it, seeing everything she needed around Austen's neck. The lady no longer doubted that she had accidentally harmed the library's eternal guard. But Henry was in no hurry to admit that he was a spy, because he served this family faithfully. Although he threw the book at the girl, he did so only to protect himself. The book turned out to be a thin children's fairy tale and could not have caused any harm. So Rosanna's suspicions were unfounded, because she had stumbled upon the wrong person. The whole point was that yesterday, Austen was unable to squeeze a word out of himself due to the strength of the Duke's daughter. But the lady couldn't shake the thought that the guy was still behaving strangely, trying to test her. However, the librarian himself only wanted the miss to take full responsibility for her actions. At that moment, they noticed an assistant who clearly knew more than he should have. The guy immediately ran away, although no one tried to accuse him of anything. Henry reacted immediately, as he was sure that there was a spy in the estate. But the guy didn't have time to run after the unknown servant, as the heroine stopped him. The girl was absolutely sure that the traitor would soon be personally exposed. Looking at her bright aura, it was clear that no one would dare doubt the girl's kindness. Besides, Austen, with his physical attributes, wouldn't have been able to catch up with that spy anyway. That is why the lady decided to postpone the capture of the real traitor, who managed to escape. After all, the girl had to sort out the issues in the relationship between her and the librarian. Henry was clearly wary of the lady after everything that had happened last night. The heroine herself was only concerned about whether the guy had managed to tell something to her father or other servants. But Austen considered this to be snitching, so he didn't even think about it. However, the lady was still wary, as she did not know how to bribe this guy. From her face, the librarian quickly realized that the girl was even considering eliminating him. The last thing Henry wanted to do was die before he had fulfilled his duty to the Duke. But the boy's health was too poor for Leylatin to take him into service. So Austen could only hope that Rosanna would accept him into the ranks of her servants. But the heroine remembered all too well how dangerous such one-sided agreements were. She didn't intend to suffer like in her past life, so she refused the guy without hesitation. The lady did not expect that Henry would not back down so easily, because he also had his own desire. He was so persistent because the fulfillment of his dream depended only on the decision of the young lady. Austin had long been tormented by the fact that he could not properly defend the honor of his family by serving the Duke. Roseanne did not interrupt the librarian, as she was interested to know what he would say. It turned out that it was Henry who ended the line of servants to the Duke due to his health. But Austin still wanted to serve the Leylatin family as closely as possible. But the thing was that the librarian didn't need a lady as an assistant. All her affairs were managed well by just one maid, so the Miss did not have to think about anything. The librarian then furiously declared that he was the only one who knew the young lady's secret. He diligently pressed on the fact that the lady would not be able to kill calmly, although he did not know about her past. Now, when Henry's fate was about to change for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to back down. Roseanne couldn't resist asking the guy a few test questions about who he would serve. And Austin honestly admitted that among the Duke's other children, who were not there, he would not have chosen the lady. The girl liked the honesty of the guy, who was not afraid to object to her right to her face. But Henry did not stop there, because he was confident that the lady had enough strength to resist the emperor. This is exactly what the Leylatin family had been doing all these years. But only Rosanna knew about it. So the heroine no longer doubted that it was worth hiring this man. She promised to find another librarian as soon as possible, so that Henry could get down to business. The great warrior always knew how to choose people, so she began to trust this guy. Henry was truly delighted that his candidacy had finally been approved. He did not tell the lady about his thoughts, because if he knew the Miss's secret, he would have chosen her. This is because Austin never saw anyone else on the throne after the emperor was overthrown. Rosanna had all the qualities to stand up to the stupid and impudent ruler, so Henry had no doubt that a good and bright future awaited him with the girl. As a test task, the lady asked the new assistant to catch that servant. Roseanne immediately realized that this guy was the spy, but she only reported it now. But Austin understood perfectly well how important it was to catch the traitor in the estate. He was shocked that the lady had wasted time talking instead of starting a search. So, in just a moment, there was no trace of Henry, who had quickly fled in the library. The Duke's daughter delegated all the work to the new servant and knight, while she herself continued to rest. She didn't know the spy's purpose, but she planned to figure it out after he was captured. Soon the girl moved to her favorite garden, where she continued to sample the delicacies. The lady had already gotten used to giving jewelry to everyone she liked, and now such a gift went to the cook. The heroine easily parted with her jewelry, while the maids valued it highly. As a result, in a short period of time, Rosanna gathered around herself true and loyal admirers. The girls tried their best not to upset their mistress, even for a moment, but all this was done only in order to continue receiving gifts from Roseanne. The heroine understood the maid's train of thought perfectly well, but she was satisfied with this state of affairs. A couple of minutes later, River returned with a thank you from the satisfied chef. It was not difficult for the maid to push everyone else aside, as if by accident. This assistant was the most intelligent, so she took good care of Miss. But, although the spy had not yet been caught, the heroine did not even think of worrying about her safety. She was completely confident that she could deal with one stupid traitor herself. At that very moment, Rosanna felt the presence of that very guy who was hiding in the bushes. The girl understood that in a little while the guy would run away, so she took action. As soon as the lady's knife flew off somewhere into the bushes, the maids started running around her in horror. The assistants were unaware of their mistress's powers and abilities, so they often underestimated her. But even they had enough hearing to realize that knights were running towards this place as fast as they could. Roseanne once again acted as if nothing unusual was happening around her. But with one movement, the lady caught the spy, whom all the knights in the estate had been chasing for a long time. The guy couldn't pull out the knife that had pinned his hand, so he just whimpered in pain. A few minutes later, the Duke arrived on the scene, rejoicing that the spy had been caught. But the knights had a new problem, which they were embarrassed to even tell their master about. The whole point was that none of the guys were able to pull out the knife that was holding the traitor. No matter how hard the knights tried, everything ended in cries of pain and pleas for salvation from the spy. The traitor himself could not make his fate any easier, so he was forced to suffer constantly. It was the first time Leylatin had seen such measures, so he logically wondered who had done this. Only now did the man notice his daughter nearby, and everything instantly became clear to him. However, The Duke could not say anything to the girl in front of such a large crowd of people. Miss didn't even think that it would be dangerous for her to be nearby, while the knights were worried about this moment. The girl herself walked past her father, not even deigning to glance at him, because she noticed her knife. Miss pretended that her cutlery simply flew away while she was trying to cut the pancakes. Laylatin was so afraid he couldn't unclench his fists, because he remembered the girl's strength during the wedding. However, the man collected his thoughts and said that if Rosanna wanted, she could take her knife back. But the heroine didn't even think about pulling out the knife, because it could have become an excellent tool for interrogation and torture. So the great warrior demonstrated how to properly communicate with spies. The girl herself didn't even notice the cruelty with which she was now treating the guy. The lady's priority was to interrogate the spy skillfully so that he would confess how he got into the estate. She only allowed the Duke to intervene in the torture process for a moment, but it became clear that he was incapable of anything. So Rosanna took the initiative again, because only she could handle this task. From the girl's mood, the spy quickly realized that he would not get off so easily, and his face turned white with horror. The heroine was not afraid to hurt people, because she had seen too much cruelty in battles. So now it was impossible to convince the Duke's daughter to show even a drop of pity. The people around were terrified by the horrors that the lady had promised the traitor if he remained silent. But no one dared interrupt Rosanna, who now seemed to everyone like a real devil in the flesh. The great warrior was serious about finding out who exactly sent this guy. No matter how much the spy asked to give him a little time, the lady did not even think about such a simple option. She deliberately pretended to leave the traitor until tomorrow in order to intimidate him even more. It worked perfectly, and out of fear, the assistant confessed that he had been sent by the magic tower. Rosanna didn't want to deal with magicians more than anything in the world, because they had done her a lot of harm. It was these people who summoned the girl for the emperor every time, using the ill-fated seal. Every time the great warrior stood before them, she felt as if she were a small and powerless child. So the thought that the magicians could track her down again greatly troubled the girl until the very night. Rosanne had no time to formulate any plan to counter these powerful opponents, but it was not entirely clear whether it was she who had really attracted the attention of the magic tower. At such moments, the heroine always remembered her close comrades with whom she had fought before. The girl, with a smile on her face, thought about how great it was to be next to them now. Those knights were distinguished by their intelligence and strength, and could always find a way out of any situation with the help of humor. The next morning, the lady began with her having to come up with a suitable task for Henry. In general, Miss did not expect that the guy would be assigned to continue working with her so quickly. Of course, Rosanna had nothing against it, since she herself had chosen the new assistant from among the librarians. The girl was even ready to believe that Henry would soon be promoted. But the guy himself did not want to rely on luck, which is why he took fate into his own hands. The lady was pleased with the talent of her new assistant, but just in case she sent the maids away. The heroine wouldn't want River and the others to hear something that doesn't concern them. Only when the assistants had left did Austin dare to begin the report he had prepared. He was able to find out that the magician's name was Gary, and he had joined the estate many years ago. This meant that the traitor was not interested in Rosanne at all, although he could find out something about her. It was just unclear how a person with magical abilities ended up with Laylatin. Miss had no idea how the magic tower could get around these complex rules. At this point, Henry excitedly asked if he had been approved for the role of assistant. The guy guessed that the lady gave him such a task only to test his abilities. And indeed, the heroine conceived such a test, since she did not want to deal with Austin. But everything changed when she realized that the Duke could not understand why Gary was sent to him. So the librarian had already sent an indignant letter to the tower, demanding an explanation. But the heroine did not want to interfere in something that did not concern her, because the magician was sent many years ago. However, the lady was interested in who was currently the head of the magic tower. Henry knew that the tower was ruled by the powerful Liam, who was considered to have many faces. He constantly changed his age and appearance, which spoke of his incredible reserves of magic. Rosanna immediately realized that such a person would easily reveal her identity when they met. That's why Miss ordered Austin not to dig under Liam, so as not to attract his attention. At this moment, the assistant informed the heroine that Duke Varfos was eagerly awaiting her. And this time, the girl decided to meet her friend at the main gate so that they would not be overheard. Although the gate was quite far away, the lady still refused to ride in the carriage. Thanks to her training, the girl could easily cover such distances, so she called the maids with her, who were now always on the side of the mistress. In this caravan, the young ladies moved towards the gate, no matter how difficult it was. Meanwhile, the Duke's knights were shocked that Rosanna had kept them waiting for so long. But Varfeus did not allow the servants to talk too much about the lady he liked. The longer Chaitin waited, the worse he became from the influence of the terrible curse. But soon his wait was rewarded. As Laylatin's daughter arrived for the meeting, if it weren't for her tired maids, the heroine would have arrived at the gate much earlier. No one could believe that such a fragile girl was really not tired at all. Only now did the great warrior remember that she was more resilient than the other ladies. Therefore, Miss had to urgently use all her acting skills to skillfully deceive. Rosanna pretended to be so tired that her own legs couldn't support her. But the Duke managed to catch the girl in time, although he noticed something strange in her behavior. Chaitin didn't want to let go of the lady even for a moment, because next to her, his mind was completely cleared. But their touches couldn't last forever, because Rosanna was just playing her role. She believed that she had fooled everyone around her, although this was not true at all. Of course, like a true gentleman, Barthius offered his carriage to the Duke's daughter. In fact, the heroine had been counting on something like this in advance, but not in order to arrive at the estate. Miss wanted to go on a date with the Duke in order to spread rumors about their relationship. The heroine herself was not at all embarrassed when she said something so romantic and beautiful. But the guy couldn't even imagine what place the girl would choose for their date. She invited him on a boating trip, which wasn't the most popular choice. Chaitin was increasingly surprised by how unpredictable Miss was. But this trait of Rosanna only attracted the Duke more. Although he did not admit it to her, doubts constantly wandered across Varfus's face, so the heroine noticed it. But the girl decided that the guy was afraid of water, because she hadn't even thought about his feelings. The heroine felt sincerely sorry that she had chosen the wrong place for a date, but Chaitin immediately assured the girl that he had never been afraid of anything in the world. The guy only wanted Rosanna to no longer perceive him as a child. Before the Duke could react, the lady pulled him into the boat on the water. In fact, Laylatin chose this place in the hope that they would not be overheard, and Varfeus, who knew how to steer the boat on his own, only contributed to this plan. Chaitin had sailed on water several times before, so he was ready to tell the lady everything. Unlike him, the heroine saw for the first time the full beauty of a clean and almost transparent river. She openly enjoyed all the gifts of nature, as she loved to observe such things, so one could see a truly happy smile on the face of the great warrior. The girl herself did not expect that she would enjoy this short trip with the Duke so much. Varfeus fully shared the lady's wishes, trying to find the quietest place possible for them. At that moment, the lady was only worried about whether the guy would really be able to handle the controls. But for someone who had been sailing on a boat since childhood, this was really just a piece of cake. The lady had no idea that her friend had such a difficult childhood because of his greedy father. The heroine did not respect the ruler, so she did not call him as formally as others. But Varfeus was confused by this tone, since he always tried to adhere to the rules. Rosanna hadn't planned to change her behavior, but she still thought about it after the guy's words. To Chaitin, she always seemed fragile and innocent, but she constantly exceeded his expectations. He sincerely did not understand why this girl evoked so many emotions just by looking at her. Chaitin felt an instinctive fear and respect for the lady, as if he had met her before. But all these emotions seemed inappropriate to him for the miss, whom he saw for the first time in his life. Rosanna could calm her friend with just a few words, as if it cost her nothing at all. Varfeus had needed this kind of support all his life, and only now had he found it in a girl. It was time for the Duke's daughter to ask all the questions that interested her. Of course, the heroine planned to finally find out what happened to her friends during the battle with the dragon. However, the miss didn't have time to finish, as she abruptly pulled the guy towards herself, which he didn't expect. Immediately after, an arrow flew a few centimeters from Varfus's face, hinting at an assassination attempt. Rosanne matter-of-factly stated that Chaitin should have used an umbrella too. But the whole thing was that while the couple was boating, some people attacked them. Chaitin was a true gentleman, so he could not allow the girl to get hurt. He was sure that the lady had never encountered murder before, so it would affect her. However, the guy couldn't let go of the enemies who almost killed him with one shot. The heroine obediently pretended that she was terribly scared, so she clung to her friend. But suddenly, all of Chaitin's thoughts were occupied by her thin and attractive neck, which was nearby. At that very moment, his entire body was gripped by a wild desire, as the curse suddenly awakened. But the girl's gentle voice quickly brought the guy to his senses. Although he did not answer her for some time, Rosanna had no idea about the thoughts that had just been going through her friend's head. She was acutely aware of the danger from the outside, so this time she hit Chaitin in the chest. As a result, they both fell to the bottom of the boat, and more arrows flew over their heads. However, the lady managed to once again pretend that her luck was just a coincidence. The Duke had no time to find out the details, because the enemies were not going to wait for the end of their conversation. It was common for the boy to see the water turn red due to the blood around it. He didn't know that the heroine was also used to this, as she had fought constantly in the past. That's why the lady didn't lose her composure now, although any other girl would have been horrified. In the Duke's mind, it would have made much more sense if Rosanna had begged him for salvation. So the guy only wanted to deal with his opponents as quickly as possible even more. He threw himself headlong into battle, not at all worried about his body, since he was many times more powerful than his enemies. The great warrior could not join this battle, but her help was not needed. But from the outside, she noticed what a strange feeling emanated from the Duke during the battle. Chaitin seemed to revel in the pain of his opponents, easily dealing with each of them. The aura emanating from the guy at that moment reminded the lady of the power of a black dragon. This meant that the battle with the monster was not over, and the Emperor would need Rosanna's power. At that moment, one of the enemies, who had carefully approached, attacked the girl from behind. But it would have been much better for the opponent if he had attacked the Duke rather than the heroine. The man clearly realized he couldn't beat Chaitin, but he picked the wrong man. So the girl defeated the enemy, who was superior to her in all respects, in one move. She was not afraid to mortally wound the traitor so that Varfus would not be able to find out about anything. In just one instant, the enemy was defeated, something he didn't even have time to fully realize. The heroine looked at the opponent, who was destined to lose, with no pity in her eyes. The girl then threw the man into the water, knowing full well that he would sink to the bottom. Rosanna dealt with the enemy so quickly that the Duke was unable to notice her actions. So, within a minute, peace and quiet returned to Leilatin's boat, as before. Since the umbrella and hairpin were covered in blood, Miss got rid of them without regret. She arrived just in time, because by that time, the Duke had dealt with his enemies. The guy heard some noise coming from the girl, but didn't find anything suspicious. In the end, Rosanna managed to talk her friend into forgetting about this strange situation. The girl could not reveal herself to the Emperor's relative, no matter how close they were. Meanwhile, Chaitin believed that the lady's safety was paramount, so he swam to shore. The heroine felt good to feel that at least someone was caring about her after a long time of loneliness. No matter how much the miss insisted on continuing the conversation, the Duke decided to send her home. The guy was sure that the girl simply hadn't yet recovered from the shock, which is why she was calm. But the thing was that such a situation could hardly surprise the great warrior. Varfeus continued to attribute all of the Duke's daughter's discontent to the consequences of the horror. Although the lady tried to prove that she was fine, it was absolutely useless. In any case, Rosanna didn't even think of blaming her friend for what happened to them. The guy found it surprising that the girl once again thought differently. So, despite the recent assassination attempt, he was able to smile and forget about the stress. So he returned to the conversation about defeating the Black Dragon with a squad of knights. Rosanna couldn't cope with curiosity, so she prepared herself to listen carefully. In fact, the heroine understood how dangerous it was to speak carelessly about the Emperor. Chaitin felt a little calmer, knowing he could trust the lady and protect her if anything happened. The guy didn't know that this girl was a great warrior whom no one could defeat. He began his story with how 10 years ago the Emperor called the knights to him. Then the ruler selected only those who would have to die later, even if they won. But young Chaitin had no idea that his own father had decided to send him to certain death. It was then that he first saw the great warrior, who struck the young man at first sight. The girl's stern gaze did not frighten Varfeus, because the depths of her eyes were full of justice and wisdom. Miss was surprised that the guy immediately guessed who the great warrior was. But for the Duke, this was a common thing, because he was a relative of the Emperor, and he felt like a hero. Chaitin had long since realized that there was some kind of connection between the warrior and the imperial family. Moreover, the admiration was connected with the fact that only that lady could speak openly with the emperor. Rosanna concluded that she should have been more careful with all the ruler's offspring. Only the emperor could summon her, and his family could give the ruler an unnecessary hint. Varfeos himself found it strange that the hero was constantly passed down from generation to generation. People tried to steal the seal with the summoning, but the warrior responded only to the call of the emperor. Only now did the lady realize that she would have to face the ruler if she wanted freedom. The abundance of information made the girl's head spin, as everything only became more and more confusing. And Chaitin continued the story of the incredible hero who fearlessly rushed into battle. It was only thanks to this girl that they managed to seal the black dragon in such a short time. But immediately after that, the lady disappeared, as if she had never existed in their lives. Bitterness overtook the detachment when they encountered imperial knights on the way back. The heroine had no idea that the emperor would want to hide her identity from everyone so much. This act seemed unfair to everyone, and Chaitin tried to overcome the dragon's seal. But in the end, only he was able to return safely to the imperial palace. Rosanne was horrified that her friend had to survive all this time. The guy himself had long since gotten used to the fact that his own father was constantly trying to kill him. This sad story did not leave the lady until the night, although she could not help in any way. What angered the heroine most was that all her friends were killed just to keep her secret. The girl was so angry that she smashed the mirror with her fist, not wanting to see her face anymore. She felt the pain perfectly well, but she didn't care, because her friends were in much more pain. Naturally, such an obvious noise did not go unnoticed by Henry, who was just patrolling the area. The guy burst into the Duke's daughter's room because he was very worried about her condition. In reality, everything turned out to be much worse than the faithful assistant could have imagined. At that moment, the heroine was not ready to say even a word in response to Henry's concerns. As a close aide, Austen had no right to ignore his mistress's condition. So, in just a second, he took everything into his own hands and even lifted the Duke's daughter off the ground. The heroine was not accustomed to the fact that aristocrats paid so much attention to ordinary wounds, but the guy was well acquainted with the rules, so he came up with a picture that was a little more convincing. He threw the lamp with all his might so that no one would realize that the lady had hit the mirror with her bare hands. This was the only way for everyone else to believe Roseanne's legend and not ask any more questions. Miss still couldn't understand why it was so necessary to invent such a story. The former librarian had long since become accustomed to the fact that his mistress was different from other ladies, so he calmly said that aristocrats usually did not break a mirror with their bare hands. In a couple of seconds, a worthy plan to save the girl from suspicion arose in Henry's head. Only now did Rosanna realize how good and smart an assistant she had chosen for herself. In fact, Austen didn't just visit the lady for no reason, because he had news about that magician. It so happened that during the interrogations the guy died, but not even because of the cruelty of the knights of the estate. Gary didn't want to die at all, and therefore promised to tell everything he knew. Henry was present at the time, so he saw with his own eyes how the guy suddenly exploded. The explosion was so powerful that the nearby knights suffered severe burns. Rosanna guessed that in this way, the magic tower had avoided all questions about the traitor. This case became more and more confusing and complicated, and there were still no answers to the questions. Austen noticed too late that the lady was about to make the legend of the injury even more plausible. Therefore, he did not have time to stop the girl from crushing the fragile teacup with her hands. The assistant could hardly restrain himself from scolding the Duke's daughter for such carelessness. He began to collect the fragments with his own hands, forbidding the lady to approach him. The guy immediately guessed that Rosanna did this out of anger, and he was completely right. The assistant was no longer going to allow any more injuries to the girl who did not spare herself. Henry had only a few minutes to call for a doctor in a calm environment. As soon as the guy ran away, the heroine began to think about how fragile the ladies were. Rosanna was definitely lucky to have such a sensible and wise man by her side. Meanwhile, Chaitin recalled everything that happened to him after returning from the battle. At that moment, the guy had to bury empty coffins, since the bodies of his comrades were not found. But Varfeos didn't tell anyone that in fact all these people were saved from death. The knights secretly served their master. Otherwise, they would have been dead long ago. Even Paul didn't know about this story, although he was the Duke's closest assistant. Until the very end, Chayton was afraid that someone might betray his friends, and they would be sent to their deaths. That's why Varfus didn't tell even such a good assistant anything about the past. From time to time, the gentleman was tormented by an unnecessary feeling of guilt because he had lied to everyone. However, Paul was always on Chayton's side, even if he didn't know the details of his doubts, due to the endless thoughts in his head. This time, the Duke ended their late meeting early. Varfos kept thinking about the lady, who seemed frightened to him after meeting with enemies. The guy would really like to do everything to ensure that the girl does not get into such situations in the future. He still could not understand the reason for his feelings, but his whole body was drawn to the Duke's daughter. Even now, Chayton secretly hoped that Rosanna thought about him at least a little too. There was a high probability that this was the dragon seal's effect, but Chayton didn't know for sure. But even the all-knowing Henry could not prevent all the consequences of tonight. It's all because Duke Lilatin had been yelling at his daughter since early morning for her nighttime antics. He was angry that the girl was trying her best not to pay attention to him. The man constantly punished the lady with house arrest, but it had no effect. And now the Duke had to report to the Emperor himself, which he feared. But the heroine didn't care about these small details, so her father's shouts only irritated her. She pretended that her health had worsened due to the constant ringing in her ears, and the assistants immediately took the girl as far away as possible from her father, who still had not told her everything. What irritated the lady most was that she was forced to go to tea with the other aristocrats. From the very beginning, she felt the contemptuous glances of the ladies, which she tried to ignore. Only in solitude could the heroine find salvation for herself, but even that did not last long. While Rosanna tried to distance herself from the lady, they continued to gossip loudly about her. Because of her heightened sense of smell, the girl felt that one of the ladies was constantly watching her. It was Potlengi, who had never forgiven the daughter of Duke Leilatin for her recent loss. But the heroine was amused by the fact that she defeated the impudent aristocrat Brina with such ease. But the girl did not expect that the ladies would soon move from silence to action. She would have preferred that the aristocrats continue to gossip behind her back without touching her. However, Potlengi, with a false smile, declared that she could not leave Rosanna aside. The heroine understood that her refusal of the company would only raise more questions from people. So with a sigh, she allowed these girls to join her humble table. This is how Rosanna found herself almost in the center of attention, although she did not ask for conversation. She didn't even try to listen to Brina's boring conversations, which interrupted everyone around her. The other ladies happily supported Potlenga's conversations, trying to make friends with her. They did not dare to say a single word against Brina, encouraging her desire to marry the prince. None of the aristocrats suspected that Rosanna was only interested in the delicacies on the table. It was to them that Leilatin devoted all her time at tea, ignoring small talk at the table. Brina mistakenly attributed Rosanna's silence to fear of opening her mouth in such a large group. So Potlengi began to openly laugh at the lady who could not speak. But the heroine sincerely didn't know what they were talking about, because she hadn't been listening to her interlocutors the whole time. The girl didn't feel guilty about not keeping up the conversation at the table. She wasn't at all interested in the discussion about who would receive the title of the Heavenly Galaxy this year. It was quite by chance that the great warrior treated such a famous title with disrespect. She immediately realized that she had said too much, since Brina's look did not bode well. Potlengi won this title every year, so she couldn't allow anyone to laugh at him. But Rosanne had no arguments in her defense, because her words were too careless. Suddenly, Brina suggested that the Duke's daughter compete for the famous title this year. The heroine reacted sluggishly to such a battle, as she was confident of her victory this time too. But the aristocrats around were already interested in the duel for such an important reward from the emperor. Potlengi won the title every year, so she had no intention of giving up this place to anyone. Only now did Leilatin think about what bonuses this title could bring her. After all, neither the emperor nor the magicians will pay attention to her if she can win. The benefit was obvious, so the girl nevertheless accepted the challenge from the stupid Potlenga. In fact, Brina had hoped that her rival would run away at the mere mention of battle, so she couldn't believe that Rosanne was actually interested in this duel. But the heroine was already seriously determined, not intending to back down from victory. At that moment, her eyes were cold as ice, and they pierced just as strongly and painfully. So Brina felt awkward, even though she simply looked into the eyes of her self-confident opponent. This circumstance struck Putlengi so much that for a moment she forgot where she was. The girl was saved only by the fact that the heroine at that moment decided to finish her tea party. Rosanna did not notice the presence of one of the members of the imperial family, as she was lost in thought. But Brina immediately headed to Joseph, who had arrived for tea for the sake of one lady. But Putlengi was not the one the prince deigned to show his interest in. Instead, the guy was looking for Rosanna, as she was the one he wanted to escort home. This hurt Brina so much that she was at a loss for words when communicating with the prince. The girl tried with all her might to keep the heir near her, because she wanted to marry him. But it was clear from Bellois that he paid almost no attention to the aristocrat in front of him. Instead, the guy remembered all the rumors about Rosanne, who did not disappoint him at all. What Joseph liked most was that the Duke's daughter decided to fight for the title of the galaxy. He fully approved of this competition, and he himself would have chosen Leylaten as the winner. The aristocrats immediately noticed that the heir showed sympathy for Rosanna, but the lady herself refused the prince as rudely as if he were just a poor commoner. None of the ladies could allow themselves to treat the one who would take the throne in the future in such a way. But the heroine never cared about the status of people who irritated her with their behavior. However, the prince only laughed loudly in response to the girl's rudeness, as he liked it. Joseph was tired of people crucifying him, so he was delighted with Rosanna. He even ordered everyone around him to follow Leylaten's example and communicate more boldly with the aristocrats. In fact, all this time, Bellois was hiding his anger because the lady did not listen to his warnings. Rosanna remembered the ban on communicating with Varfeus, but she had no intention of following it. The heroine always pursued only her own interests, and now she didn't care about the prince. But for some reason, Joseph was sure that the girl would not be able to resist his beauty. So the guy came to the event specifically for the lady, in order to give her another chance. But Rosanna didn't need such a favor at all, since she didn't care about the family's honor. While the prince could not allow Varfeus to gradually get closer to Leylaten, only one heroine never tried to befriend the prince, as the others did. For some reason, the heir felt a terrible pressure next to her, just like from his cruel father. But the guy pushed these images away from himself, imagining only the sweet and charming face of the lady. Therefore, no matter what the girl told him, Joseph was unable to take his eyes off her. The heroine did not want to prolong this pointless conversation because she did not respect the prince. But the guy suddenly grabbed her hand, wanting to stop her from leaving without his permission. The lady's reaction was not long in coming, as her body reacted at the same moment. But the heroine overdid it with her strength, so the guy accidentally bumped right into her chest. The heir immediately blushed to the ears, since he did not allow himself such intimacy with women. Before Rosanna could even think, she pulled the prince, which is how she ended up in this situation. But the girl did not lose her composure and accused Joseph of grabbing her so unexpectedly. She pushed the guy away forcefully, pretending to be furious at his random actions. But everything was not so simple, because Duke Varfeus also came for Rosanna. He also ignored Brina, heading straight for the lady he was interested in. The guy pretended to be the very picture of charm, so that the Duke's daughter could not refuse him the trip. But even he couldn't predict that Rosanne would be so popular among men today. Although Miss had already rejected Joseph, he did not lose hope of her consent until the very end. The relationship between the emperor's two sons was strained, so they got into an argument. Everyone around watched in surprise as Chaitin and Joseph argued with each other. The lady did not enjoy being the center of attention, so she quickly ran away. The girl was quite capable of getting to the estate on her own, which is why she refused to be seen off. She didn't regret the time her friends spent getting to tea, but Rosanna couldn't refuse Varfeus, since they already had a cooperation agreement. That's how easily and naturally Chaitin passed Joseph, no matter how hard he tried to attract Mrs. attention. The Duke could hardly hide his joy at his victory, openly mocking his defeated opponent. The heir was not used to being humiliated, so he only grew angrier with each passing second. And only Rosanna thought sadly about how she managed to get into such a situation. While the aristocrats continued to discuss for a long time the fact that the Duke's daughter was so popular, the ladies gossiped loudly about this because Leylaten had provided so many rumors, and only once again, defeated, Brina had a hard time coping with her shame in high society. At the Leylaten estate, the lady, as usual, received a reprimand from her father, who was dissatisfied with her behavior. But, as usual, the heroine did not feel ashamed of her actions, no matter how much she was scolded. The man was horrified that his daughter was claiming the place of the prince's bride. Only now did the girl realize that she had put herself in danger with her actions. She was not allowed to have any contact with the emperor under any circumstances, but that is exactly what she achieved. As soon as the lady hit her head on the table, the duke lowered the tone of his shouts a little. He even thoughtfully brought eggs to his daughter so that she could apply them to her sore head. Layla 10 advised Rosanna to prepare for the ball in silence, as there was no other choice. Since the heroine was only worried about food, she was now little interested in other matters. Once again, the father was amazed at how bad his daughter's manners were. But the duke could not hide the fact that the girl gave him a chance to get closer to the ruler. If Rosanna wins the title, she will meet the emperor in person during the award ceremony. So the man was delighted that his family could rise so high. At that moment, nothing could spoil the good mood of the duke, who was already dreaming. Layla 10 always wanted to appear proudly at events, without bowing his head to anyone. And at that moment, the ruler still could not find a place for himself because he had lost track of the hero. It constantly seemed to him that enemies were about to attack, and he had nothing to defend himself with. So he only allowed his assistant Jarrell into his dark chambers, who often brought news. This man was searching for the missing warrior, but so far he has not been able to find anything. However, he pleased Beloise by coming up with a good plan to capture the heroine. This news made the emperor jump out of bed, driving away his unnecessary mistresses. He was ready to resort to any means, just to find the missing great warrior. In case he didn't like his assistant's plan, the emperor immediately took out his sword. But Jarrell had no intention of disappointing the ruler. As his life was dear to him, he planned to use the upcoming ball to find the heroine using the seal. While the seal was in effect, the girl could not escape outside the empire without permission. But the emperor could not understand how his event could help in capturing the warrior. Jarrell calmly explained that the ruler needed to invite all the aristocrats to the ball. So, the girl will definitely be among them, since she will not have the opportunity to refuse. Jarrell was confident that he would recognize the warrior even among such a crowd of people. Although it took time to gather all the commoners, the plan really should have worked. So the emperor laughed loudly, anticipating an easy victory in the search. He had no doubt that he could trust his assistant, who had never let him down. So the capture of the warrior was only a matter of time, because Jarrell knew his business. Naturally, the servants began to prepare the young lady in advance for the event from the ruler himself. Rosanna was not prepared to have to choose both a studio and a jeweler for the ball. She no longer wanted to go to the celebration, because she could reveal herself at any moment. So the girl asked the maid to send a refusal from the ball, so that no one would bother the lady. But River understood that this was impossible, because the ruler invited absolutely everyone. While the heroine didn't care about her loss to Brina, because it didn't cost money. So the assistants had to explain to Miss how important the upcoming ball was. The warrior did not expect that the ruler would oblige every aristocrat to appear at the event. This meant that she would definitely fall under suspicion if she refused to come to the banquet. The last thing the lady wanted in the world was to be punished by having a private conversation with the ruler. After all, in that case, she would be immediately recognized by the magicians, who were always on duty near His Majesty. More and more, Rosanne realized what a dead end she had found herself in due to her own stupidity. The assistants had no idea why Layla was sad, so they consoled her in the wrong way. River said she would definitely find the best tailor to create exquisite dresses, and Henry promised that he would find the most expensive jeweler because the lady deserved the best. But all their proposals caused rage inside Rosanna, which she did not want to attract attention to. The girl understood that she could no longer compete with people in public view, so she asked her assistants to find the quietest and cheapest options for the masters. However, River and Henry were seething with energy, so they hardly listened to the mistress's demands. At that moment, the Duke, who was looking for her all over the estate, also fell on the girl's head. The man was overjoyed, because he had brought a very expensive gift for his daughter. He personally managed to secure reservations at the most expensive ateliers, from which the lady had to choose one. The Duke was sure that Rosanna would be grateful to him for such a wonderful opportunity. If the lady were this man's real daughter, she would truly shine with happiness and joy. But the heroine did not understand the delight of these people, who were only chasing expensive things. Besides, the girl had no intention of flattering the Duke's vanity just to improve their relationship. She chose the most discreet option for herself and planned to stick to it until the end. But the servants appreciated the opportunities that the Duke so generously provided to his daughter. Joseph always went to the first tailor on his list, so they had the best quality. But the second studio was no worse, since Lelatin often bought expensive clothes for himself there. Third place was always preferred by Varfeus, for whom custom-made clothes were made. So it was no surprise that Rivera was beaming at the possibilities. The maid always wanted only the best for her mistress, and now these positions came so easily. So now the assistant didn't have to stand in long lines for just one reservation. As soon as Rosanna showed River the precious piece of jewelry, the assistant immediately changed her mind. The lady insisted that the maid choose a quiet place, and the girl did not object anymore. The heroine was going to continue bribing the servants in order to achieve her goal and not stand out. No matter how hard the assistants tried, they could not understand the train of thought of the Duke's daughter. So River was noticeably upset that Rosanna had not chosen the best tailor. The maid knew only too well how difficult it was to reserve a place in them. Only Henry's support allowed the assistant to calm down a little after the lady's decision. The guy was sure that the Duke's daughter intended to find jewelry among the old collections. That's why he now supported Rosanna's desire, because the search could be crowned with success. Austin had heard many stories of old relics gaining new life and popularity. River was so delighted by the guy's reasoning that she completely forgot about her recent sadness. On this good note, they parted to quickly deal with important matters. Soon the maid received another gift from her mistress, who was pleased with her work, all because she found such a quiet place that she was afraid to think about, even in her dreams. All the outfits in this studio were quite old-fashioned and simple in their execution. The master was not too busy due to the small number of orders, so he turned his attention to the clients. It was the first time in his life that he had seen such a rich man, so he was so surprised that he couldn't stay on his feet. Rosanna couldn't believe she could evoke such emotions in people, because usually everyone didn't react so emotionally. This tailor's name was Julio, and he was barely making ends meet, so he didn't expect any aristocrats to come to him. Yesterday the guy heard about the reservation, but he was free all day, so he didn't even write down the client's name. So now he was shocked to find himself accidentally chosen by the famous daughter of the Duke of Lelatin. The tailor could not control his trembling voice, although he tried to be polite to the guests. As soon as the lady sat down in the chair, she immediately gave the guy the task of sewing her a dress for the ball. A look of uncertainty crossed Julio's face, as he had never received such a complex order before. But it was impossible to convince the heroine, because this place completely met her requirements. The girl immediately laid out a lot of money, so that the guy would not dare to refuse her because of his greed. Rosanna had no preferences, so she completely trusted the poor tailor's taste. Julio couldn't believe his ears when the lady promised to wear any dress he prepared for her. River couldn't keep silent, so she reported that her mistress had already refused all the famous ateliers. Moreover, at this ball, the girl was going to win the famous title of the Heavenly Galaxy. This responsibility only further frightened Julio, whose skills left much to be desired. The heroine only sighed after the stories of her maid, who did not help the common cause at all. The girl casually consoled the guy, and it turned out that this had found her another admirer. From that moment on, Julio decided to dedicate all his outfits to the wealthy Lelatin family. After some time, the heroine noted how tired her body was after one short trip. Although it wasn't surprising, considering how much time they spent trying them on. River was even more exhausted than her mistress, so she was already fast asleep. Looking at her, the heroine smiled sincerely, because everything in this life constantly made her happy. She didn't expect that the adventures wouldn't end there, because the Duke was waiting for her at the gate. The guy was upset because Rosanna did not choose his studio to make her dress. The heroine immediately noticed that madness was gradually creeping closer to Chaitin's mind. So she was the first to reach out to Varfeus to ease his condition with a touch. The Duke fell silent in surprise, as he felt calm and warm in his soul. All this time, he hid from himself how much he needed intimacy with the girl. Only now, the guy sincerely admitted that he felt a little better after this. The heroine had no idea how difficult it had been for Chaitin to cope with the curse all this time. The Duke tried not to leave Rosanna's side for a moment, as he felt worse without her. So, despite being tired, Layla 10 made time for her friend to chat in the living room. She was the first to firmly take the Duke's hand, unaware of how it looked from the outside. The heroine believed that she was only helping Varfeus and did not think about his feelings in return. As soon as they entered the living room, Chayton became interested in where exactly the lady had gone. Her refusal to work at his studio hit the guy's self-esteem hard, causing him to noticeably lose heart. The Duke could not understand why the lady preferred the almost bankrupt studio to all the others. He had always suspected that Roseanne was stubborn, but now it was more evident than ever. Varfeus was afraid that the girl acted this way because she couldn't get into an expensive studio. The guy assumed that the cost of the dress was too much for Rosanna to afford. He remembered very well how the lady had previously clung to any opportunity to earn money. She even convinced Chayton to defend her in a duel so that they could take the entire prize together. The heroine herself was so absorbed in food that she did not notice her friend's heavy thoughts. Whatever he thought, the guy didn't even get close to the truth that the heroine was hiding. At this point, the lady remembered that she was not alone in the room, so she started talking about the studio's price. She remembered that one of the armors was provided by the Duke, for which she was sincerely grateful to him. But the girl had no intention of turning to famous masters, as she had a different goal. Chayton felt wild jealousy when he heard that Joseph had also booked the atelier for the lady. Rosanna didn't accept help from anyone, but that didn't matter to the guy anymore. He felt that his position in relation to the miss was becoming shaky because of the heir. Joseph was always one step ahead of his relative, so his chances were many times greater. But the curse inside the guy increasingly forced him to do everything to possess the lady. All this time, he suppressed these emotions, but with each passing day, it became more and more difficult to endure. So the Duke was surprised that the girl considered Joseph to be somehow unpleasant and evil. For some reason, the lady concluded that the heir would laugh at her if she lost to Brina. Therefore, the heroine was not going to trust Beloise, although he tried to befriend her. This attitude of Rosanna towards Joseph was only to the advantage of Barth, who had already begun to feel jealous. At the end of her speech, Miss consoled the Duke, seeing how worried he was about her choice of atelier. As soon as the girl stroked the guy, he immediately blossomed into a joyful smile from this. Only in front of the Duke's daughter did Chayton feel like a cute puppy, not a formidable wolf. Therefore, the Duke was increasingly drawn to Rosanna, who did not even think of being afraid of his personality. The guy had no doubt that Miss would be able to win the title of the Heavenly Galaxy. Unexpectedly for herself, the heroine felt embarrassed by her friend's kind words and sweet smile. Chayton was so eager to become the girl's partner at the ball that she could not refuse him. Rosanna really couldn't imagine a better ally for herself than the Duke who had already been chosen, so she only became closer with the guy who was head over heels in love with her. A few days later, Julio arrived at the Leilatin estate with the completed outfits. The heroine was only glad that the guy was able to finish earlier than she could have imagined. The tailor was looking forward to the lady's reaction, as he had put a lot of effort into these outfits. He deliberately covered them with dark cloth to show 3 different options in turn. Julio maintained his secrecy for a while, just to drag things out a little longer before the show. This made Rosanna and Rivera's excitement even more noticeable, as they were both burning with curiosity. The tailor acted as if his dresses were at least works of art, and what he presented on the mannequins was truly difficult to call an ordinary outfit for a lady. The most impressive thing was the last dress, the likes of which had never been seen before. The guy himself understood how difficult it was to choose between these wonderful options, but none of the girls were delighted with the dresses that the tailor had sewn with his own hands. However, the heroine promised that she would wear a dress from Julio, so she chose the latter option. No matter how much River tried to dissuade her mistress, the Duke's daughter had already made her final decision. A heavy atmosphere fell over the entire estate because of the dress the girl chose. Only the maid understood the full horror of what was happening, but she could not save Rosanna.